Welcome to DK Engineering's latest user's guide, and today it's the Mercedes SLR McLaren. The Vision SLR was dreamt up by Mercedes in 1999. It was their reawakening to their motorsport heritage that they'd left behind in the mid-1950s following tragedy at Le Mans in 55 and ultimate success on the Mille Miglia in 55. Sterling famously won in a record time with an average speed of 99 miles an hour, which, considering it was 1,000 miles over approximately 10 hours, was an unbelievable feat, even by today's standards. This was a project that, as a result of the partnership with McLaren between 2000 and 2010, was ultimately refined, tweaked and produced by the McLaren brand, and of course, Gordon Murray was behind that. So his ultimate influence was what resulted in this end product, which is this very underrated today SLR, as they've become known. So the Vision SLR was supposed to be Formula One inspired, which is why we see this F1 nose, very evocative of the front of a Formula One car. The Mercedes badge actually acted as an air intake for the engine, and it was a 5.4 litre supercharged V8 that came from Mercedes, of course, very similar to the G500 or the CLK DTM, but ultimately tweaked to produce peak power for the brand. Now, Mercedes wanted this project to be a front-engined Super GT. McLaren wanted it to be mid-engined. So as a compromise, as mentioned, Gordon Murray tweaked the design, and a few things that he did were as follows. The front axle was moved 200 millimeters forward, meaning the engine could be placed more towards the center of the car, almost under the dash, a bit like a Bizzarini, if you like. The second thing was that the engine was dry sump so that it could be dropped as low as possible. And then the extraction for the engine, for the hot air from the engine bay, was on the side of the car, as well as the exhaust pipes being on the side of the car, meaning that, again, it could be dropped even lower because there was no exhaust that needed to run underneath the car. And that meant that for the rest of the car, it could have an entirely aerodynamic and efficient flat bottom and a full rear diffuser, adding aerodynamic gain, performance, and downforce, which was a huge plus. Even the wheels were designed to be aerodynamic, so the wheels were designed to extract air from the wheel wells. And not only that, the brakes were the first full carbon ceramic brakes to be fitted on a road car, as standard. It was this very car. Finally, at the back of the car, we had a 65-degree air brake, which again was a first for a road car. The carbon fibre tub was again a first for Mercedes, being fully carbon fibre. Not even the CLK GTR had a full carbon fibre tub. And it was made from 4 bonded pieces, which is something Gordon had wanted to do on the McLaren F1, but wasn't possible, and that had to be made from 30 riveted pieces. So the production car was finally launched in 2003, with Sterling Moss alongside in his 300 SLR in Brescia. The price was eye-watering. It was double the price of a 575M Maranello, the same price as a Carrera GT, which, given the Carrera GT was almost a hypercar of the time, and this was supposed to be a super luxurious GT, gives you some idea of the kind of clientele that Mercedes and McLaren were pointing the car at, and as a result, the kind of collections that these cars should sit in and the kind of cars that they should sit alongside today. So, onto the user's guide. First things first, opening the doors. Well, we've got this classic Mercedes key set. To the back of the door, there's this panel, which you simply press in, and the McLaren F1-esque dihedral doors open, which gives you a really great way to get into the car because it's so clear, there's nothing in your way. So, underneath the dashboard, there's a lever, as you'd normally expect, which pops the front. Then we need to move around to the front, and there are 2 handles. Right next to the light on each side, if you go underneath, you'll find these 2 pull handles. You put your hands underneath, and you pull, and that allows you to lift the bonnet up to a point like that, and you sort of rock it forwards like an ironing board. Then we move to the back, and up she goes. So whilst we're in the engine bay, let's just quickly talk about the design again, this being a mid-engined but front-engined car. Mercedes clearly wanted to rival the 575, and the 575, very much like the 250 GTO, was front-engined and V12. So with the Mercedes, they wanted it to be a front-engined SLR, reminiscent of the 1950s. Gordon Murray wanted it to be mid-engined. So as you can see, the front of the engine is here. It's right back, and it is well behind the front axle, which means that the engine, like I said, is a bit like a Bizzarini, pushed right under the dash, which means that servicing of the engine is a little bit complicated, as some of you will know that the major service and the spark plug change that's needed requires the engine to actually be removed from the car, which can be rather costly, although there are some great specialists out there these days that do it very well and very efficiently. At the front of the engine bay, we see this big plenum chamber which feeds right to the front to the Mercedes badge, as we discussed earlier, giving that ram air effect and getting the air into that plenum chamber before it's fed into the engine. All super low, super slim. On the equivalent Ferrari, you'd see another, 6 inches or so on top of the engine whilst they have all of the air intake system operational, but they kept this really low, long and sleek. One thing to point out as well, as it's a user's guide, is where would you check your oil level? Well, the dipstick is here under the front scuttle on the passenger side. Simply pulls out and back in it goes. And then engine oil is filled up again on the passenger side from this filling point here. Closing the bonnet, we simply put it back down again, move to the front, be careful of your fingers because this is a bit of a process. Place your hands on top of the bonnet, slowly guide it back, get it to a point, and then let go, and it's closed. So, being a Mercedes, this was supposed to be an Uber GT. It was supposed to combine performance, power, technology, but with the comfort of perhaps an SL or a CL coupe. And that means that in the interior here, we've got an abundance of familiar Mercedes switchgear, ease of use, comfort, semi-electric seats, the lot. But let's not forget, this was a fully carbon fibre car. The tub, the bodywork, everything was carbon fibre. The only thing that wasn't was the rear subframe, obviously in aluminium, and the front subframe again. So we'll start with putting the key in the ignition, which is to the right-hand side of the steering column. Very familiar Mercedes of the late 90s, early noughties, in terms of it doesn't have any metalwork to it, just slots into the slot. We turn the ignition on to the right-hand side. And to start the car, on top of the gear stick, we've got this very cool lift the cover, reveals the red illuminated button to start it. Foot on the brake, press the button. And to turn it off, you use the key. So moving back to the rest of the interior, there are obviously the very standard Mercedes items like lock, unlock, hazard lights, the AC system. Behind this panel here, we've got the stereo system. It's all very straightforward, right down to the cruise control, the windscreen wipers, the indicators. It's classic late 90s Mercedes with the single stalk that you use as the indicators. You turn them to turn the windscreen wipers on. The lights are to the left-hand side of the steering column. Again, using the single stalk. Push away for main beam, pull back towards you for dip. But let's look at these seats. So very McLaren in terms of they are a fully carbon fibre, single-piece bucket seat, but with that clash of Mercedes wanting uber luxury, also fully electric. So we've got tons of adjustment in terms of rake, forwards, backwards, and even height. All controlled by the lever just by the side of your seat here, which again looks very familiar, very much like a Mercedes you'd normally see on a door, but by the side of the seat here. Also, on the driver's side, we've got the window switches just by the seat here to drop and raise the windows. On the driver's side, we've got 2 switches. On the passenger side, just 1. Then in the middle here, we've got the mirror adjustment, so left to right, again, super familiar Mercedes stuff. And then if we move to the back here, something which I love about this is not only this top button opens this huge cubby hole behind the seats here, but the lower button presents that very early noughties vibe with your inbuilt Nokia Mercedes branded mobile phone. The one feature that isn't quite so standard Mercedes is this little function here. There's a switch in the middle which is for the rear air brake, and it's got 3 settings. 1 is obviously in the middle just as normal. 2 is test, which is of course super important that sometimes you're going along and you have that thought, I really need to make sure that my air brake's still working. So if you hold it down, the rear air brake tests itself, let go, and it goes back down. And for those of you a little bit like on the Carrera GT, which I never really understand, but you want to ride with your rear wing up the whole time, if you just push it up, you can ride with your air brake up the whole time. For me, I'll just leave it in the middle and just sometimes use it at the end of a big straight to test. So just to show you how to open the doors as well, as they're not conventional, there are no door handles on the doors, there's nothing on there at all, no window switches as we said, no handle, no mirror switches, the mirrors are in the middle. But to open the door, we've got this lever just in front of the seat adjustment and the window switches, this lever which you pull towards you, and again those dihedral doors open up for you, ready to get out. So now we'll just move to the final part of the car, which is the boot, which we press this button, opens the boot. Let's go have a look. So moving just to the boot for the final part of this, there's a couple of interesting things in here. So it has got a really generously sized boot, and underneath the carpet you get to see all that lovely carbon fibre, which just reminds you, this is made from a 4-piece carbon fibre tub. But on the left-hand side here, we've got this little panel that you remove, and the windscreen washer fluid is in the left-hand side there. Put that back in. If we want to charge the battery, we've got our C-Tech charger points here. So we've got earth on the left-hand side, which we just clip onto there, and the positive charging terminal here on the right-hand side below this red cover. So you clip onto there like that. Also, if we undo this little panel here on the right-hand side, we've got all of the tools and the warning triangle and some spare oil and bits and pieces all sitting in there, so it's all nice and neatly put out of the way. And that's in the boot. Put that back down. We've got the first aid kit on the right hand side, CD changer on the left hand side, handy fire extinguisher on the left as well, a 12-volt plug here if you want to charge via a cigarette lighter socket. And so there we have it, Mercedes SLR McLaren. Mercedes' answer to the 575 Maranello of the time. As we said, same price as the Carrera GT, and an uber luxurious, super fast GT for the road. A car for the future for sure, one that's definitely overlooked. We hope you've enjoyed this user's guide and look forward to seeing you for the next one.